fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Well, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, and Mr. David Van Helsing is co-hosting today. Mr. Van Helsing. This is crazy.
Well, give the intrusion.
I was surprised you did it. I was sort of in a shock when it first came up. And I was like, David Martino. No, not the David. Not the David. And, yeah, I was surprised. I mean, I don't know why. Because you did a good job, and I don't.
No,
of course you would do it, but
I'd wanted to be an actor at one point.
Well, that point is not over yet.
Yeah,
you're still young.
I am. I'm in my 50s now. I can do action films.
You can do whatever you want. You know, we can just CGI up the body parts that you don't want, and whatever. You know,
yeah,
you can make it look like anything. That's great. You know. Fantastic show. So anyway, maybe you'll become a regular on that.
You never know.
You know, I thought that was really, really a cute thing. I always liked that right from the get-go. I thought that was unique to act out the readings and stuff. I thought that was kind of fun. And I'm surprised more haven't done that.
Yeah.
You know, because it is kind of a fun thing. Anyway.
Yeah. But it's fun classic reads on YouTube.
Yeah. That's great.
If people are looking for it.
Yeah, it is. And I'm going to get the link put on our website. I think I did that before. Cool. So people can go there, because I like to promote things I like. So why not?
Yeah.
You know, and
we appreciate it.
We're getting close to, Halloween. That's how we do it in the House of Mystery. We do a Halloween, not just Halloween. Or it's just like, we have to do things a little differently.
Right.
Yeah, right. It can't be like everyone else. So
that's right.
Yeah, and we'll explain that as time goes on, so people will be surprised what happens on Halloween. That's terrible. Anyway. Speaking of horror, dystopian, and all that sort of stuff, we've got an author sitting in with us today, and she's got a new book out called Silencers, and it's a young adult dystopian. So, Jenna Greene, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Jenna, so what is this about? This sounds really terrifying and depressing.
Well, I do my best. I love dystopian literature, the idea that you can have an alternate society, especially if the character is either unaware that they don't live in the best society or complacent about it. Then they realize as things go on that their world can't be that way or shouldn't be that way. And not only that, when you have young adult characters, that they have the force of action to try and do something about it. So this is the start of my second dystopian series for YA readers, the first one being the Reborn Mark series. And that one dealt a lot with slavery.
Tell us, what is this story all about?
Well, as you mentioned, it's definitely a dystopian. I love the idea of an alternate society, either where a character thinks their society is idyllic and then realizes it isn't, or that they are not fully aware of what's wrong with their society, or they knew the whole time and just can't do anything about it, which is why the YA characters are absolutely phenomenal, because they are that bridge between childhood where they have limited powers and adulthood where you have some power in your life. So Scona is she's not as rough off as Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games, but she's definitely not, the richest person in town. She has to live off the charity of neighbors, and there's a lot of instability in her life. So she thinks, well, I'm going to join the Silencers because there's a stipend if you study with them, and that will make sure that my family's taken care of for the next few years, and then I get a career my whole life. So she's thinking, this is a great deal. Unfortunately, everybody in her life warns her against it, and Scona's a little stubborn, and she doesn't listen to anyone around her, her parents, her brother, her friends, her teachers. So she pursues it, and then, as all youth realize, as they delve into something, it's often far different than what they first expected.
Why is dystopian so popular, you think, right now, especially with young adults and stuff like that? There's a ton of, this type of television and streaming movies and shows and now books and stuff. Is it just is it the actual dystopian feel, like the end of the world sort of concept, or is it just that it's a different world, do you think?
Well, some dystopian is apocalyptic and the world is over or the world has ended and we're trying to fight through the remnants. But a lot of dystopian is just highlighting one aspect of our actual society, whether that be, our love of voyeurism or our love of judgment towards other people or whatever that is. And so it highlights that element that needs to be worked on in our real society. It expands it, and it gives you a way to study it and look at it in a way that you might not. But then there's also the adventure. There are some darker elements. I've never seen a dystopian where it's all sunshine and roses. I don't know how that would work. And so a lot of that struggle against things that are bigger than us. And that idea that you can have an impact on the world, that's pretty, dystopian's dark, but that's a pretty uplifting notion that you can create change in the world.
Well, what's the difference between writing a young adult book as opposed to an adult novel? Are there things that you have to think about or do differently when you're working with the idea that you're writing for young adults?
Oh, absolutely. I've never written for adults, so I don't have any experience there, but I do write for children, middle grade, and young adults. So I have to be very careful of how I write, because an 8-year-old reader cannot handle the same thing as a 17-year-old reader. I'm not going to shy away from any topics, and I'm not going to shy away from any scenes, but I am going to tweak how I describe them. In a middle grade, a lot of the action might happen off camera, off scene, and it's more hinted at. And then, lower young adult, you might say someone died, but you're not going to describe it in all the gory details. And then, as you might with an adult, like an adult, you can Stephen King it up, and you can slash and dash and mutilate and have entrails, and you can probably do that in young adult too, but you would also just want to be well aware of your audience. And so you can hint at things, you can shorten your descriptions or lengthen them or choose your words very carefully. And then the joy about children, though, and censorship and all those, is that kids don't digest what they're not ready for. So as long as you're pretty careful and you're not finding a book for a 7-year-old and describing things in like horrid detail, if they're not ready to encounter that, they just kind of won't process it. And the same thing with all the ages. So as long as you're writing with some sort of awareness of your audience, you should be okay.
So your character Scona, it's an interesting character name, but how do you see your character when they're a young adult as compared to an adult? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you relate to them, and what kind of relationship do you have with them?
Well, luckily, I have two things in my favor. One is that I'm a teacher. So, I'm around young audiences and their voices and their thoughts all the time. And the second thing in my favor is I'm not highly mature myself. So I think a lot of my characters are smarter and braver and more logical than me in a lot of ways. So those two really, really help. And maybe I could just tap into innocence a little bit. My husband would call it naivety, but I prefer to say innocence. It just sounds better that way. And so those two things really help me in terms of kind of understanding what a young adult can do versus their limitations and their struggle against, what their family has said about them or enforced upon them, whether good or bad. But they have to learn to define themselves. And often through any young adult, they stumble and they struggle through that, and they make a lot of mistakes. And so that's always part of any young adult, whether it be dystopian or whether it be contemporary or whether it be any other genre in between.
In developing your characters, can you hear them? Do you have an inner monologue, or is it more visual for you? How do you experience that?
I'm pretty visual. I can kind of see their actions and things. Sometimes, even if I'm not at my computer typing, I kind of like stare off into space a little bit And, my husband will be like trying to tell me about groceries. And I'm like, I'm writing. He's like, you're nowhere near the computer. No, I'm writing. I'm thinking. I can see the scene unfold. I'm pretty lucky in that my characters leave me alone for a big chunk of the day. I don't know how I'd handle it if they were active 24/7 and I never got any sleep and I never got any work done. So they're quite nice, and they tend to just appear in little spurts. But I can tend to just kind of sense what they would do and say, and that includes minor characters and things like that. Some characters come across more strongly than others, and honestly, they don't obey ever. I don't think any author anywhere knows any character that ever does what they're told. You have a plan, you have a plot, and the character just takes it in their own direction, and you're just along for the ride. And I think many, if not most authors would agree with me that characters are just errant little buggers that never listen to you.
That's true.
Well, there you go. So is this going to be a series then? Or are you going to do this as a series, or is this going to be a one book only?
I like series. I'll amend that. I love series. My last Dystopian was a trilogy. This one definitely has the opening for it. The ending definitely would lead to a sequel. It's really about whether I can find the time to do it. I think my writing brain has kind of exploded lately, which is a wonderful thing, but also a problem to have, in that I cannot follow every plot path I want to. I cannot be simultaneously writing 38 manuscripts. So we'll just have to see when I can fit it in. I don't think it would be a trilogy. I think it would end up as a duology. So I think that it would be 2 books, which is not as common, but definitely becoming a newer thing. I think that, this story could be told in the 2 parts.
Well, in creating a series, or even just when you're creating, a long novel itself, how do you make sure that the continuity is on point? Do you create a Bible, so to speak, a series Bible, or do you have systems or tools or notes? How do you handle that?
I do now. The first series I ever wrote, which was a fantasy series, I did not. And that did not go well. But I was really young and I was just starting out, and I didn't know anything. And so when I wrote the second book, I had to do reverse research of my own novel, and I had to go back and reread the first one and remember locations and dates and things. So I've learned from that, and I do have documents and notes so that I don't forget characters' eye colors and locations of things. And then I have a really sweet editor named Tasia Morgan, and she also, when she goes through, will make her own kind of book Bible or series Bible, so that I have those 2 documents to kind of look at to make sure that there is that continuity.
And so how did this story start? Do you start with the world or the characters or a storyline in developing a book?
Well, every book has its own journey and its own story. So sometimes, a dream might inspire something, a meme might inspire something. In this case, the world and the character came all together. Often, a first chapter will hit me, and then that's where I kind of go from there. And I often know the beginning really well. Then I have to figure out the ending, and then I just kind of fill in all the pieces all together. But this one, it deals a lot with mental illness, and I have an anxiety disorder, and I think this is a story I've wanted to tell for a while, but I didn't want it to be straightforward. So that's why it ended up being kind of more metaphorical. It's dystopian, and the character is not me. This character is far more brave and agile and adept. But still that underlying current of something very close to my heart and something very relevant to society that we can, this book can bring forward and highlight, but not in a way that you're being preached to, just in the way that you are fascinated and you're really on the edge of your seat as to what Scona's journey is going to be, because a lot of things happen to her. She gets herself into a lot of situations. She has to figure out how to get out of these situations, and just when you think things are getting better, of course, things get worse.
What's the biggest challenge in writing something like one of these stories for you?
That's a good question. Trying to write something my aunt will read but is always a good one. She doesn't like it when I harm characters, and I am quite brutal to them. So I'll get a phone call or something and be like, well, really, did they have to go through all that? And yeah, they did. Trying to kind of walk that fine line between world building, but making it like revealing that world in a way that it's not boring, because you have to avoid the info dump. You have to avoid just the 90-page prologue. It's more about making sure I'm telling the story through the character's eyes, and then they can reveal things in a logical way, and they can discover things, and so the audience and the character can discover things the same way at the same time, and that's honestly the best way to do it, so that you are not just dumping a bunch of information on your reader that they have to get through in order to enjoy the meat of the novel.
When you were talking about how a young adult and a dystopian kind of highlights something wrong in society and stuff, do you set out to kind of have it, I don't know, even if it comes organically, but to have some sort of lesson or some sort of thing that you want the reader to take away from it?
I follow themes. So we have those themes, and then the audience can draw their conclusions as they will, which, I would assume many of them would draw a similar one. But in this case, there's a lot about stigma, and there's a lot about how we deal with stigma. There's a lot about how we deal with someone that is different. There's a lot about how we deal with illnesses that aren't always physical. Like, you can see a break, you can't always see other types. So I just follow the themes, and then I don't worry about what conclusions people draw, because if you do, that gets a little too preachy. So we just follow the themes, let the character explore it. Different characters can voice different meanings and messages, and they might even be contrary to one another. And so that allows the reader to come to all sorts of different conclusions. Oh, we can see Scona's point of view, but there's also a character named Cheney, and we can see her point of view. And so that's where the text really becomes very rich and dynamic.
Right. Well, we don't care about Cheney. No. So what do you get out of writing a book? When you do one of these books, at the end of it, what's the result for you?
Oh, I'm just really happy. Well, it's hard to write a book. And I don't think enough people understand that. Like, I work with a lot of newer writers, and they're like, oh, I wrote a book, but I'm like, you wrote a book? Do you know how hard that is? Do you know how many threads you are holding together? I mean, you have to be thinking the same time about vocab and syntax as you have to do with lot, holes, and character arcs, and like, it's quite a magical thing. So when I get to the end and I think I've done a good job and I'm edited it 9 trillion times, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and it's a big achievement. It really is. And, I can't say enough about it. So what do you got going on in your life then? How many of these do you do a year, or kind of what's your scenario in writing?
I get a lot done in the summer. Being a teacher, I have that time off. This summer was interesting because I usually spend it writing and I was editing, which that usually times out during the school year. But, things are as they go. It's interesting in terms of publication because it's all in the hands of the publishers, and sometimes their mandates go quickly and sometimes slowly, and that's just how it is. You might be third in line, you might be 31st in line, you might be 300th in line. So, this year's a little interesting because I just had this book release about a month ago, and then I have another one in April, but, the year after I might have nothing. Lots more YA, of course, on the horizon, and middle grade, just because my daughters are kind of reaching that age, so I've got more of an interest in it. So I don't see myself ever writing for adults. I just don't really understand them. I'm apparently one of them, but I don't get it.
Yeah.
I've been an adult for 24 years, and I still don't think I'm doing it well.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's not you don't want to admit to that. Nobody wants to be an adult. I keep
practicing, but I don't get adulthood.
Do you set your books in today's date, or do you go a little bit in the future or in the past? Like, where do you kind of venture?
With my middle grades, they're very contemporary. And my YA, honestly, there is no real date right? It's an alternate society, so you don't really know anything about that. It could be our society 1,000 years in the future, 1,000 years in the past if things had developed differently. So I don't really have a time for my YAs, more for my middle grade.
Is it hard to write a different world? Is that like a real challenging thing? It's
harder. I wouldn't say that it's like, I find historical would be the hardest for me. I don't think I could do that research. And then I'd want everything to be accurate, and I admire historical writers so much, but I don't think I'd ever could be one. Creating a world is pretty fun. It's more challenging to reveal that world in an appropriate way. And the more ways that different world can resemble our real world makes it a little bit easier. Not that this book was easy to write, but I mean, the houses, the city, the school, those are all very familiar things. Versus, if you have other books where even the homes they live in and the food they eat is vastly different. And so you have to keep all that in your head, and it can get tricky. But I think historical accuracy, I have none, but I think world building is a skill that I have. And so I think all authors kind of have to know where their wheelhouse is. Not that they can't expand beyond it, but obviously some things will be easier and some things will take a little bit more work.
Well, you were saying writing a novel is a big achievement. And, made me think, how do you get through the novel to reach the end, to finish what you've started? I like to joke that, it's kind of like I enjoy tedium. to get through it, I must. But what's it like for you?
Well, there's a lot of banging my head against the wall, but overall, actually, it's a really fun process. I don't find getting through a draft that hard. Editing, I have to more force myself to do it because I think editing's probably more important, but it's less fun. There's not the joy of discovery. It's more, I guess it depends on what stage of editing you're at, but some of it's just kind of nitpicky and you're not progressing as fast. Like I could write a chapter or two in a day, and editing I might only get through like 3 sentences in 5 hours. So I find the drafting much more rewarding. So getting through that isn't actually that hard. And if I get stuck, what's going to happen next? Often I just go for a walk, and usually by the time I get back, it's resolved itself in my head. And sometimes I only make it halfway down the driveway, and I'm back in the house. I'm like, oh, I got it. I figured it out. Not much of a walk.
Trust the unconscious mind.
Yeah.
You could always drink a couple of cocktails, too. That works, too, sometimes. I don't know.
That's a different strategy.
That's a different strategy.
Yeah. As long as you edit sober.
Yeah.
Right drunk, edit sober, yeah.
Yeah, could you imagine? Okay, listen. So, readers, how do you like readers and fans to get in touch with you? Do you have a website? Do you have social media? Where do people come find Jenna?
On the street, through carrier pigeon.
On the street?
Skywriting.
Lemonade stand.
Skywriting's a really nice one. I find that's a nice touch, but not everyone has access to the plane. So, jennagreene.ca is my website, and then Greene Writes is my handle on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and on all those. So I'm pretty easy to find as long as you remember that it's Jenna Greene with the E on the end of green. That's the only tricky part.
Yeah, of course. Well, we'll have all that up on our website too, so people can find it easily and stuff. And .ca. So you're in Canada, eh?
Hey, yep.
Yeah, there you go. Something new every day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the book Silencers is a young adult dystopian, and our guest is the writer, Jenna Greene. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jenna.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.